What advice would you give to the students in the room, the teenagers? I mean, how would you advise them to proceed in their culture where that's really insistent upon creating this false dichotomy?
Well, you need to arm yourself. Okay, put on the armor of God, for example. But you need to know the facts. You need to understand the arguments. And there are many, many arguments. Now, one thing which is very important, and what you'll hear a lot of believe me, I'm very familiar with the online atheists. They actually know me quite well. And what they will often say is, well, there's no proof of God. Absolutely true. There is no proof of God. And by the way, there's no proof of almost anything. Science doesn't use the word proof. That's a mathematical and logical term. And I challenged one of these friendly people to show me any scientific paper in the literature that uses the word proof. Never heard back. There are none. We don't talk about proof in science. Why? You all know why. Because science changes all the time. A proof is, a mathematical concept where you can use logic and axioms and, reasoning to prove a proposition that it's valid. But to say that something is true or not, to prove that it's true, you have to think that you know all of science. And we know we don't know all of science. There's so many things we're just starting to understand the reality. So there is no proof of God, and there is no proof of anything else. There are all these examples of things we were absolutely sure were true, and then 10 years later they're not. Now that's how science works. We keep growing, we keep learning, and we keep replacing what we used to think was true with something else. The real question is there any evidence for God?
Yeah.
That's the question, because when in science what we talk about is evidence. Is there evidence for evolution? Yes. Is there evidence for gravity? Yes. Is there evidence for, by the way, none of these are proven, right? Okay, but in a specific sense. But there's evidence for everything that we know scientifically. And is there evidence for God? Oh my, yes there is. Is it scientific evidence? Yes. And I'll show you some. Is there other evidence that's not scientific? Absolutely. And you all know about some of those. What is, just very quickly, love. Okay, where does love come from? There's no scientific explanation for love. There are some, but they're all made up.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
What you talk about those just so stories.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are so common. I think
Yes.
would really be helpful for people to think about that.
It's a good point, Brandon, and here's why. Because if you use that argument, if you say there's no scientific explanation for love, somebody will answer you and say, oh yes, it's neurochemical impulses that come from the brain and go out and cause various areas of the brain to do things, and you get emotions. But if you pursue those arguments strongly, if you say, well, which areas of the brain exactly? They don't know, because there is no particular area of the brain. Okay, so if you keep pressing, those just so stories fall apart.
And what he means by just so, it's like it's these, oh, that happened just so that this. And there's like this,
Yeah,
it's spoken about like there's like some end in mind when people often talk about it.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit and that I actually work on in theoretically is the origin of life. And it's very amusing to me to listen to a so-called scientific atheistic view of the origin of life, because I've heard a few people, and some of them are fairly well known. There's a particular person who calls himself Professor, I won't mention the other name, who's very popular on YouTube. And, I've seen his videos on how easy it is to explain the origin of life. He talks about, well, you know, you have amino acids and they get together and you have proteins, and he keeps going, and at some point in his discussion you will hear the word somehow. That's not science, folks. Okay? Somehow, we often say somehow in science, but the whole point is to find out what that somehow is. And Professor, quote, doesn't do that. He just says somehow, and then we have a little, and he keeps going. So
It's a big jump.
It's a big jump.
It's a big jump.
It's a
I
big
remember I was at the Smithsonian, which I love, and I was in the Origin of Life exhibit, and there was a little, like a video that was playing. It was talking about water. And in the video, I was just observing the video, and they said, you know, then the earth was like this, and then water created life, and then...
I saw that, yeah.
He's like, okay. And I'm just like, wait, hold on. And then water created life? Dr. Gart, how does water create life?
It doesn't.
Okay. So if we just shake this long enough, it's going to turn into something. Okay. So somebody asked the question. They want to know, has having a relationship with God allow you to better understand not only your field of science, but also understand yourself better?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the irony is that my father, who was an absolute atheist all the way, I mean, he would make Richard Dawkins look mild, he knew and he taught me that science cannot answer everything. He was a scientist, and all scientists of any value know this. They know it because it's obvious. You can't answer everything with science. That idea, which is called scientism, is a philosophical concept that is not held by scientists. It's held by people who have substituted the worship of what they think is science, but it isn't, for what they really should be worshiping, which is the creator of everything. And yeah, I mean, the world is not all science. There's something else out there. And what is that other thing? It's what I started to say. It's love. It's human relationships. It's, you know, the feeling of peace, the feeling of brotherhood, of oneness with the universe, of oneness with all these feelings and emotions. You can't dismiss this by saying, oh, that's just your emotional feelings. They don't count. Sure they count. Why don't they count? Of course they do. And to answer the question, when I said those words, I believe, and I was sitting there in my car, I immediately had this amazing feeling of joy, relief, freedom, understanding. I had been one of those people walking in darkness who had seen a great light. And that great light has never gone out. It keeps shining. And that's the light of Jesus Christ. So, yeah.
That's awesome. So I have another question here for you from someone. They want to know, what were the most common questions that you encountered from some of your scientist colleagues who maybe were atheists in your field? And what were some of your common answers to their questions?
Well, my friends and colleagues tend to ask me things like, are you okay? They're not very mean or upset, but a couple of them, especially one or two really close friends who are still atheists, have actually read the book and have gotten a little bit more understanding about where I'm coming from and why. It turns out that there are a few very well-known, very militant atheist scientists. You probably know their names, maybe. But the majority of scientists who are atheists don't care. They're focused on their research, on their work. They have good motivations. They don't believe in God for whatever reason, but they're not going around trying to proselytize for atheism based on science. So when I first became a Christian, and I actually kept it to myself because I didn't know what to do with it, but once I began telling people that I was Christian, most of the response I got was surprise. It's still very rare in academia, but not a lot of hostility. Just, oh, that's interesting, kind of thing.
And I was going to ask you about that. Do you think, had you been, let's say you had maybe grown up in a Christian home or something, do you think you would have pursued the sciences? The reason I ask this is one of the theories that I have, and maybe, I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but the reason why I think we all have this desire to understand the transcendent, and we're pulled towards it. You said you were pulled towards it through science, essentially. There's something about it, transcendent, that you were drawn to.
Right.
And I think that many young people in the church, for them, it seems like an easier pathway to maybe go into ministry or to go into some sort of another way of accessing that isn't the science. Whereas maybe for someone growing up in an atheistic household, that's kind of the only pathway. So I'm wondering if maybe the reason why it seems like so many non-believers are drawn towards science. Do you think this could be part of it? It's just that is the pathway to the transcendent.
I think yes. I think that's a very good point. And the reason is, if you decide you don't believe in God, the next question is, what do you believe in? And there are various answers to that, but one of them is, well, I believe in science. Which doesn't even make any sense, because science is a tool. So
I believe in hammers.
There you go. Exactly. It's a tool, it's a methodology, it's a way to learn things. It's not an alternative to God, but people will do that because of what you just said. You're right. It's another path to transcendence. And transcendence is critical. We're human beings. We're made in the image of God. We really are. And what does that mean? That means we're looking for God. We're not animals. We're not just foraging to survive and live like animals. There's something else about us. We have souls.
In your book, you talked about human exceptionalism.
Yes.
And how that was a draw for you. Can you explain a little? Maybe we'll finish up with this question before we go to the next book.
It's a big question. And it's very important because, as growing up in a family of leftists, very liberal people, I was taught that human beings were worthwhile. I'm not going to go into details because communism has some other interesting ideas, but the basic idea was that everyone deserves to have rights. Okay, working people, middle-class people, everybody is supposed to have rights. Now, the question is, why? Why should everybody have rights? I mean, that's not what they used to think, right? What is it about people? What makes people special? Where does that idea come from? Why are people worth saving? Why are people worth anything? And I didn't get that answer from that left-wing. I mean, they had ansers, but it was just, well, they are. People are worth. What's that?
There's no foundation.
There's no foundation. Exactly. It's just an axiom, which I agreed with. I always followed. And when I was in college, it was the civil rights era, and I was active in the civil rights movement. But there was something that was very odd, and that is that all the civil rights leaders were pastors. They were Christian leaders. And I had been taught Christianity is evil. So how does that work? Now, it turns out, what we now know, is that yes, all human beings are created equal, and we think of that as the foundation of our country. But where did that come from? It came from this carpenter who said that for the first time in the history of the world. Okay? Everyone come to me. And Paul laid it out very clearly in two different letters. There is no Jew or Greek. There is no barbarian or Scythian. No male or female, no slave or free. All are one in Jesus. That's what it's all about. Okay?
Someone wants to know, how can a parent best prepare their children for the case against Christianity? May they come up against it in a college somehow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if there's one answer for that. I think it's not a bad idea to discuss with your child some of the arguments that they will hear. Now, there are some good arguments, bad things in the Bible. You've all heard this, right? There's slavery in the Bible and things. And then there are some completely ridiculous arguments which, just can be easily answered. But, one of the most, I think, common points that atheists will make to Christian friends of theirs is, if God is so good, why do bad things happen? The problem of evil. And that's a tough question, but there are answers, and it's worth looking them up. I mean, I don't think the answers are inclusive, but there are ways to answer those questions. And talk to your pastors. Talk to people who have dealt with these issues. As we all know, there's a huge wave of deconversion going on in this country. When I'm writing another book and people at the publisher are asking who's the audience, and I basically say it's the nuns, the people who don't check anything. They have no religion. They're not really atheists. They're not really religious. They don't care. And that's who we need to reach. Those are the people we need to bring back, to bring back in. So I don't think it's necessary to go too far, but if your child comes home after a semester in college and says, okay, I'm done, I'm not going to church anymore, it's all nonsense, find out what's going on, be a parent. I mean, it's not easy. If you are one of those kids, keep coming to church. You'll get the answers. That's a very glib answer, and of course I don't really have a good answer. But
so I was on your Twitter, and one of the things you had tweeted I thought was worth reading, and it kind of goes into what you were saying. You said, it seems that quite a few folks have left the faith due to the problem of evil.
Right.
Why is there evil if God is good? And then you said, in my case, it was the converse. I came to faith because of the problem of good. Why should there be anything good if there is no God?
Right. So the way I was brought up and what I learned as a youth was that, life is tough. And, you have to fight to survive and struggle. And, better if you band together with your fellows and start a revolution or do something. But I just expected that everything was bad. That was my default. In the book, I have a section called the default position. What I came thinking was that things are supposed to be difficult and bad, and there is no hope, and there is no joy, and there is no love, and you just get by the best you can. You get as much pleasure as you can, and you'll hear this from people who are hedonists and say, well, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to worry about this morality stuff. I'll just do whatever I feel is good. They may not admit it, but they may live that way. So when I discovered that there was goodness, that people would do amazingly good things for each other, I couldn't understand why. Okay, so I was thrilled by that discovery, that there's any goodness at all. And there is. Okay, I don't have to convince you. There's goodness. I mean, right here on this stage, we have good people. And, who care about each other. And where does that come from? That's not from evolution. Okay, I'm convinced that an evil tribe who only cared about doing its, getting as much food as it could and taking care of itself as much as it could, would outcompete the good tribe who worried about everybody, including the bad guys. So when you talk about evolution by natural selection, that favors the bad guys, not the good guys. So why are we good at all? Why is there any good? And there is good. I mean, people are good. This goes back to your question about humanity. It's astonishing that people are good to each other. Just go for a walk in the woods someday by yourself. Go out in the countryside with no people. Walk down a path for a few hours and you see somebody coming towards you. You don't take out a weapon and get ready to kill them. You say, hi, good to see you. It's nice to see another human being. It's not a threat. Where does that come from? That's something special. That comes from God.
I've seen cats do that, and they don't say hi.
They don't say hi. They do not.
And dogs don't generally either.
I mean,
sometimes they will.
But remember that both cats and dogs are domesticated animals. If you look at wild animals, their rules are very different. It's survival. Survival comes first. Are you going to eat my food? Well, I'm going to chase you off. You know, that's
they don't share.
That's the nature of life. But we kind of violate that, and where does that come from? You know, what's the origin of that?